Welcome to Upfront. I'm Mary Ruth Snyder, and normally we would be coming to you from the Shaw Spotlight Studios on Rob Ron Road in Campbell River. But due to the global pandemic, we are coming to you from our homes and offices. Joining me for today's show, we have Eric Smiley joining us from Viridian Energy Cooperative in the Cowichan Valley, and Mr. Dave Mills from Dogwood, BC. Thank you so much for joining me today, gentlemen.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Mary Ruth.
Dave, let's start with you. Could you please give us a synopsis of what Dogwood BC actually is?
Absolutely. Dogwood BC is British Columbia's largest citizen action network. We've got a supporter list of close to 250,000 people, and we work on political campaigns in British Columbia that seek to improve our democracy and protect our environment.
And how long have you yourself been with the organization?
I'm in my 6th year with Dogwood this year.
And when were they actually founded?
Dogwood was founded in the late 90s. It wasn't called Dogwood back then. It was called Forest Futures. It was based in Victoria, and the focus of the founding organization was on forest tenure reform. It evolved over time into Dogwood. We had our period of most significant growth in starting in about 2007 through 2015, where our focus on climate and pipeline started to attract a significant amount of support from British Columbians.
And I understand you have some urgent issues coming up in the very near future, and we're going to come back to that. But first, maybe Eric, you could share with us what Viridian Energy Cooperative actually is.
Yes, I'm a project manager with Viridian Energy, and we are a workers' co-op, which means we're essentially an employee-owned company. We're an electrical contracting company, and we're focused exclusively on renewable energy work. And we've been around since 2012.
So could you give me an example of an actual project that you might be involved in?
Well, most of our work is what's called grid tie or grid interconnected solar, installing solar modules on people's homes and businesses and tying that in directly to BC Hydro and into the electrical grid. We also do a fair amount of off-grid work, which involves the batteries and the components that people often associate with solar. But we've done bigger projects in Vancouver on apartment buildings, 75 kilowatts, and we do little off-grid projects with just 3 or 4 solar modules as well.
Okay. Now, have you found over the last, say, 5 years that there has been a growth in the requirement for solar? That, like, are people actually wanting that as opposed to being part of the grid in the province?
Well, most of our clients are on the grid, and what they're doing is using the net metering program with BC Hydro to produce their own electricity. BC Hydro essentially stores it for them, and then during the winter, they often get to use up some of the credits on their bill that way. And definitely, there's been a lot of growth. Our company's been growing, and we've seen several new companies move onto the island or open on the island. It's definitely a growing market.
Now, Dave, let's talk about what your current main issue is that you are trying to gain traction for throughout the province. If you could give us a synopsis of what that looks like.
Absolutely. So we have a broad umbrella climate campaign at Dogwood that has been ongoing for some time. Right now, our focus has shifted to local power. And when we're thinking about local power, we're thinking about some of the work that Eric does with Viridian, which enables people to be generators of their own electrical energy, either to sort of offset their power bill to make their lives more affordable, or to actively help them decarbonize. And the context for the local power campaign is the realization that we're coming to in British Columbia that if we're going to move off of fossil fuels, if we're actually going to decarbonize our economy, that we need to electrify pretty much everything. Specifically, that relates to the transportation moving to places, and home heating of our spaces. And to generate the new power that we'll need to accomplish that, it's not something we can't necessarily rely on BC Hydro to provide that. The most recent study from UVic has shown we'll need double what we currently generate here in BC.
Okay. Now, if I remember correctly, there was, and I'm not going to remember how many years ago, but where we were producing so much hydro, we were actually having to sell it to the states or other provinces because we couldn't use everything that we were producing. Is that still the case?
On any given day, our power balance within British Columbia shifts dramatically. And like COVID-19 is an excellent example. Like right now, people are not using that much electricity. Factories are shut down. Office buildings are closed. Our power fluctuates hugely daily, seasonally, monthly. A great example would be last year in March, we were importing a significant amount of power from the US because we had an extended dry period and the capacity of our reservoirs was quite low. Other times our reservoirs are full. We've got lots of rain. We're generating a ton of power. We're in a surplus situation. We're able to trade it. And these variations also occur regionally. So if we look at Vancouver Island, Vancouver Island only generates 20% of the power that it uses. So we're a huge center of population in the province, but regionally we import the vast majority of our power from the mainland.
I had no idea. Even with the new John Hart generating station here in Campbell River?
That's correct. I mean, if you think about where the generating stations are on the island, and we've got John Hart, we've got Puntledge, but those wires have to stretch all the way down to feed Nanaimo, Victoria, So we don't generate the power that we use locally.
So how are you going to encourage the government to, is it a case where you're encouraging the government to loosen the regulation or to just get out of the way so that people in cooperatives like the one that Eric works for can broaden their scope?
Yeah, I think that is the heart of the challenge, because there's no doubt that the government and BC Hydro have very significant roles to play in the process of decarbonization. And how we use, trade, generate energy is quite a complex question in BC. So the short answer is that all of us need to play our part. But right now, energy policy is such that most of the energy that we use is controlled by out-of-state fossil fuel interests, because most of the energy that we actually use in British Columbia comes from fossil fuels. And the part that's not is controlled by a monopoly, which has its pros and cons. When we're thinking about the future, I think the future looks more distributed. The future looks more like local control over energy, and that has a lot of benefits. One of those benefits is giving people the power to decarbonize their own lives. And yes, so that's a part where we'd like to see government get out of the way, to allow people, to encourage people to create their own energy in regions and in communities and in their own homes.
Dave, could you maybe give us, just for the audience, what you mean by decarbonization? What does that actually mean?
All right. Well, this is in the context of the ongoing climate crisis, which for British Columbia, is pretty significant. If we go back 15, 20 years, we're thinking about the pine beetle. That's an impact from climate change. It has had a devastating impact on workers in forestry, on industry and mill towns. If we're looking at floods and forest fires, they're examples of how the crisis is here and now. And so with our emissions and decarbonization, what we need to do is move very quickly from where we are. And where we are is a place where we're emitting double the world average as British Columbians. And every credible scientist tells us, we need to be reducing those emission levels significantly. And the only way we can do that is if we take the carbon out of our lives. And the areas where we use carbon most is mostly in transportation and also in home heating. So the two areas where people can interface with decarbonization, which means emissions reductions, is with their vehicles and in their homes.
Okay, so in their homes, if they are heated by natural gas, that is a carbon?
Yes, natural gas is a fossil fuel, yeah.
So we want to get rid of natural gas?
Absolutely.
Okay, and we want to move to electric vehicles?
Yes.
And we want to stop wood burning stoves in homes as well?
I didn't say that. Yeah, so the burning of wood.
I'm just trying to put it in layman's terms for the general person who might be watching this. Well, what do they mean by decarbonization? Like, what action can I take to do that? Like, so it's using electric heaters as opposed to a gas fireplace.
Yes, it would be replacing the heat that is created by a fossil fuel with an alternative renewable source. So, a wood stove is a renewable source, because if you're using a tree to burn in your stove and you're heating your home, just as long as that tree is growing back, it will pull the carbon out. Now, this opens up a debate for sure. And
okay. So we don't need to go down that road today.
Thank you.
All right. Fair enough. So, Eric, are you seeing, I understand that Cowichan Valley is kind of a hot spot for people turning to local energy.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Cowichan Valley and much of Vancouver Island, there's definitely that type of movement. Well, what we're seeing a lot of is a lot of the solar installations we do are often tied to installing an electric vehicle charger, and also maybe upgrading electrical service so that people can put in a heat pump, which is another form of electrical heating that replaces fossil fuel. Okay.
What would you say, and you might not even have this, but what would you say is the generation or generations that represent your largest area of customers that you're servicing at the moment?
Right. I would say most of our customers are older. Their children have left home. They own their home, and they have some money that they'd like to invest into renewable energy or improving the environment, and also to leave a legacy for their children. Right now, there's not a lot of financing options for renewable energy, so it usually is up to the homeowner to come up with the money or to leverage something on their mortgage through some type of financing. So generally, it tends to be older people that are doing this.
Okay. Does that surprise you?
No, not really. I've had young children, and it's time-consuming, and there's a lot of money involved in that, and you're usually focused on getting through day by day.
And Dave, in terms of Dogwood BC, you've got nearly 250,000 people on your list, and in terms of supporters that regularly receive information from you. Again, do you have a sense of what generation or generations they represent?
I think it goes without saying that if you're better off and retired, you have more time on your hands and more capacity to engage in the conversation around renewable energy and reduction of carbon emissions. And I think that's why that's one of the things our local power campaign is seeking to change. We want to bring in climate action financing regulation that makes retrofits and conversions of existing, heating sources, as Eric was mentioning, to heat pumps or putting solar panels on your roof. There is a way to make that accessible. Climate action financing is a proven concept that has worked in the States. And if we think about a generation of people who can afford to make the changes now and can and do have the time to take action, like, we won't get where we need to go if those are the only folks who are able to engage in this conversation.
Now, did you do a recent survey around the future of climate in BC?
The recent survey we did was in relation to the Premier's Economic Recovery Task Force for COVID-19.
Okay.
And, this pandemic has shown us, it's shown us a couple things. It's shown us that when people are afraid for their future, they're willing to take pretty drastic action. And with COVID, the government has stepped in with a huge amount of money and a huge amount of energy in response to this crisis. And when the Premier came forward with announcing an economic recovery task force, we noticed there wasn't anybody on that task force who was an expert in climate. And the climate crisis and the COVID crisis, they're related. They're about pushing our natural systems to the limit. And so what we wanted to check in with was how our supporters felt about that. And I would point to both their response, which was overwhelming. Our supporters wanted to see resiliency and a better future built into the recovery. They don't want to see us going back to business as usual. I would point to that response, which was quite significant. And I would also point to some recent polling from Ecos Research that showed that 3/4 of Canadians don't want to go back to business as usual. And so when we saw the Economic Recovery Task Force, that's what we were seeing. We were just seeing how fast can we get back to business as usual instead of how can we use this opportunity to build a better BC.
And how are you situated in terms of getting that information into the Premier's office and into his hands?
Right. So we received about 4,000 submissions, and the question we asked was if you were pitching a project that would sort of exemplify what building BC better would look like, what would it be? So we sifted through close to 4,000 submissions, and we grouped them based on like themes like energy and policy and transportation.
Right.
And we picked a short list of 150 and then sort of tested all those submissions, and we picked 30 to put on a map. So we've built this map, and that will be the base point for communicating that information to Minister George Heyman, Minister of Environment, and Cabinet as well.
Okay. Eric, when you are out and about in the Cowichan Valley and you are exploring with your co-op and your customers, what is the general sense that you are getting through those conversations about where we're at and where people would like to go?
You mean in terms of renewable energy or the?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we meet a lot of people that talk about decarbonization, and I think they would like to see more movement in that direction. Definitely. I think the other is that I think there's a lot of misunderstanding out there around how BC Hydro generates electricity, what is clean electricity, and that type of thing. And so, they certainly want to engage us in those conversations, and they certainly also have a lot of questions. A lot of people are surprised to discover that the Site C dam, for example, is going to release a significant amount of methane that is a greenhouse gas. And that's not something that's broadcast quite very well. A lot of people aren't aware of that. So when they find that out, there's certainly a lot more concern.
Okay, and why is that going to be? Why is it going to release methane gas?
Oh, well, because they're going to flood a significantly large river valley, and all of the plants that are growing there are going to decompose and release methane. And they're going to continue to do that over a long period of time.
Okay, I see. Dave, when you I'm sure you've been following Site C Dam and its development. What was Dogwood BC's position on Site C Dam?
Dogwood hasn't taken a position on Site C Dam. I think Site C Dam is a great example of how the era of big energy mega projects is closing. The economics for these types of projects don't add up. I don't think the appetite for the impacts that they generate is something that people are willing to accept going forward.
Right.
So it's a great comparative example. And if I think about some of the suggestions and ideas that were put forward by people across Vancouver Island and all across BC, there's lots of examples that show that if we do things better, we can do them differently, we can get better results, we can create the power that we need that actually is more affordable with fewer long-term impacts. So yeah, I see Site C as kind of a counterpoint, an example of a model that at the end of the day is going to result in electricity that's coming in at quite a high rate, somewhere in the order of 13 cents per kilowatt hour, whereas the proposed solar project that was submitted by the Akam First Nation near Cranbrook will probably generate electricity at about 3 cents a kilowatt hour. So a quarter of the cost.
Sorry, that's shocking. At least that seems shocking. Is it shocking?
It's probably not to Eric, who's been working in this field a long time and has seen the price of renewable infrastructure dramatically fall. But that's just what's happened over time. The panels are better, they're more efficient, they're more robust, they're more affordable. So the price and the time to completion of a project, the price is lower. It's much easier to build a solar panel. And we're blessed in BC with our hydro resources. We have on-demand power that can complement generation by solar, which is intermittent. So we're really in a great situation. And yes, going forward, if we need to double the total amount of electricity we generate in British Columbia, we'll use the power that Site C creates. But I think that's probably going to be the last mega project of its type built in North America.
Now, can we go back to the solar panels for just a minute? In terms of the making of solar panels, has the greenhouse gases that are emitted during the making and the mining of the materials that go into the solar panels, has that been accounted for in the process?
You're asking me that question. Yeah, the reality is to make solar modules, we need to use our existing energy sources. And since a lot of modules are coming from China, they are using coal power. But depending on where you put those modules, the energy used to create those modules and to mine the silicon and everything is usually recovered within 3 years or less. And then for the next, the modules have 25-year warranties. So for at least the next 22 years, that's clean energy that's being produced. And so there is a net benefit to doing that, definitely.
Okay.
I think it's an important distinction to make. Like, there is no energy system in the world that's emissions free. If you're building a coal plant, gas plant, dam, any plant you're building, there are emissions involved in the construction and the deconstruction and recycling of a facility. The difference between those facilities and renewables is that during the generating phase, the renewable products are not producing emissions, whereas a gas plant or a coal plant is.
Okay. So where do you see us in 5 years?
We're going to be moving faster than government has articulated. The people that we meet out on the street are very hungry for change, and we're at the point where the technology is right there with them. If we can unlock a few small barriers to widespread adoption, we're going to be a long ways down the road in 5 years. And that's a good thing because we really need to be.
And what do you see those barriers being?
Well, first of all, people need to be allowed to freely generate their own electricity. So, and it also has to be affordable. So we need the price of electric cars to come down. Part of that's policy. The government could say, they could set much more aggressive targets around adoption, make a policy where after 2025, no electric or no fossil fuel cars can be sold in British Columbia. That would drive the cost down. It would help us speed the transition. They could also pass legislation that allows for climate action financing. It takes a lot of the pressure off of municipalities and government to fund the retrofits. In climate action financing scenarios, private capital funds the retrofits. People pay low interest loans that are connected to their homes, not their own credit systems. It helps them to bring the decarbonization technology into their own homes and lifestyles. So there's a couple key things that government could do to help people make this switch. And people are ready to do it now.
Awesome. Well, in closing, Eric, I'll give you 30 seconds to wrap things up for your end.
Yeah, well, I support what David said. We need better financing options, particularly, for example, financing that's tied to your property taxes is one option. And the other is that the government needs to create policy that we can rely on. We've had a lot of large solar projects proposed in BC that just prior to the last election, they were suspended, and there's a lot of work that goes into those. And big projects, it's very difficult to tie them into the grid in BC right now. There's not really any support for it. On the other hand, Alberta is building multi-megawatt scale plants right now because a 400 megawatt solar project in Alberta is cheaper than coal power or natural gas. So we don't have anything like that happening in BC, and partly that's policy.
Okay. And Dave, how about you? 30 seconds.
Yeah, I would point to some of the great suggestions that people submitted during our survey process. You know, the real obvious one, let's look at Island Rail. I mean, we have a rail corridor connecting the Mid-Island to Victoria. We could put hundreds of people back to work and get thousands of cars off the road by making an investment in that system alone. Another person proposed vertical aquaculture for our coastal communities who used to have canning and processing facilities. We can bring those this type of innovation back to our economy, where we're creating jobs in a sustainable way that actually decarbonizes as we regrow kelp and creates food. Tidal power, the Couscous restoration project here in Courtenay that you know, revitalizes estuaries, which soak carbon up. There are so many great proposals coming from local people that benefit islanders, that benefit the environment, that put people back to work right away. Let's get some of these projects built, and now is the time to do it. I mean, government is willing to make the investments. Let's make sure we build those investments in a better direction and build a better BC.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Eric Smiley from Viridian Energy Cooperative in the Cowichan Valley, and Mr. Dave Mills from Dogwood BC. Thank you so much. It's been a very informative half hour.
Thanks for making the time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mary Ruth.
Our pleasure. You've been watching Up Front. I'm Mary Ruth Snyder. Please join us again.